Now, I know what I'm about to say is not going to be popular with many of you, but for me...
Now, Toyota spent years making these 150 series Prados reliable, and then the 250 series comes along and mechanically speaking, it's actually very similar, but it is copping some criticism. Is that fair?
We do have a different drive experience.
I'm a little underwhelmed personally. Now, if you've watched any of our videos before, you know that we generally take you through the common issues with the car that we're featuring, show you how they're aging, what they're like to live with, and then advise you if we think you should buy one or not. But with the post-2020 Prado, well, we've run into a bit of a hiccup. Because Toyota constantly honed and improved the J250 LandCruiser Prado over its 14-year production period, by the time they built this final iteration, well, any common issues from the previous iterations had been seen to. And to make things even more interesting, when we were planning and researching this video, our wonderful mate Matt from The Right Car got in touch and mentioned that he can get his hands on this car's replacement, the brand new J250 Prado.
Yeah, and here it is. It's the altitude spec, so one of the more expensive versions, the off-road focused one. And in this video, we're going to see whether the new one is better than the old one, because this has been copying a fair bit of hate from some of the owners groups out there.
And speaking of owners groups, we actually reached out to you to find out what you wanted to know about the two Prado. So here are the answers to your questions, starting with the exteriors. Now, before we get into that, look, obviously this is a whole new format for us to do, and we'd love your thoughts on it. Do you like this kind of format? Should we do more of this, less of this? Should we include Matt or get rid of him? Let us know. Now, one of the first things you wanted to know was, what are the exterior panels like? Because some of you have suggested that on the new car, they all seem a bit thin and cheap.
Now, obviously we don't have a full toolkit to pull this car apart and see the thickness of the panels compared to one another, but we will be able to give you a bit of a door open and shut test and tell you what we reckon. So let's go with this one first. It's a bit clangy.
Yep, compared to this, okay. Even from here I can tell this definitely sounds and feels more solid. Now, the next thing you wanted to know was the weights of the bonnet. Can you hold them up with one arm while you undo the stay arm? But on these two cars, it's actually slightly irrelevant, because on this car, you've got gas struts, and on the new one,
well, let's see. Yes.
No gas struts.
You do have a stay arm, but kind of strange because this is like nearly the top spec model. That's a base model. But to answer the question, yes, you can lift it up with one arm, and I mean, it's not that hard.
You are exceptionally strong for a man.
Protein shakes, mate.
Yeah, I can
That's
tell.
how I got here.
Can tell. Now, the next thing you wanted to know was the comparison in approach and departure angles. But between the two, as you can see in the graphic, they're pretty much the same. But the interesting thing is, this shares its platform with the 300 series Toyota LandCruiser. But even though that's the case, their approach and departure angles are slightly different. Obviously, the body that's plonked on top of the platform are different between the 250 and the 300, but the new Prado is just a tiny bit larger than the old model.
But one other consideration with this new generation Prado is the design of the tailgate, the hatch area. It's different to the existing models, and not in a good way, according to lots of you who say that not having a spare wheel on the back is a concern because, well, it's underneath the body of the vehicle. If you're off-roading, if you're towing, you might not be able to access that spare if you need it as easily as you could when it was mounted on the back, like in the old version. But there is one positive to this new design, is that you get an opening glass section, which means if you're parked really close to something, it's easier to get into the boot. But there are some other considerations when it comes to the boot. We'll get to them shortly.
However, the tailgate on the 150 isn't perfect either. According to many owners, some of the seals around some of the body additions aren't that great and they can fill with dust. This just means that you've got to allocate more time when washing it, because when you cover it in water, mud pours out everywhere. Also, a handful of owners reported that their tailgate has developed rattles after as little as 30,000 Ks. In saying that though, it's pretty rare. Now, as we mentioned, when it comes to the J150, we are just going to be focusing on the post-2020 models, and that's because we've already made a full review video of the pre-2020 J150. If you want to check that video out and find out all the common issues on the older models, click the link below. But why are we just focusing on these post-2020 models anyway? Well, that's because that update was pretty bloody substantial. The big news was a bump in power and smoother and wider torque delivery thanks to a new turbo, engine internal updates, and an ECU tuned to suit. Not to mention the previous iteration's DPF issues were now resolved, plus the transmission software was improved for better efficiency all round. Tech equipment and safety features were improved across the range. For example, Apple CarPlay was finally available, only about 1,000 years after pretty much every other manufacturer. And interestingly, in sales terms, this final 150 iteration was the most popular.
And that's resulted in loads of these being available on the used car market, and we'll get to what they cost you in a little bit.
And just back to the new one for a second, fun fact, the engine is actually a carryover item into the J250, although this also has a 48 volt mild hybrid setup and a new transmission. But in terms of the hybrid system, don't be fooled. This is not the same kind of setup that you're going to find in a Camry or a RAV4. This system exists to slightly improve fuel consumption, reduce some noise and vibration from the engine, and allow Toyota to market it as a hybrid.
But a downside of the electrification of this new Prado is that it weighs more. In fact, the existing one has a better power to weight ratio than the new one.
Also on that, a few owners have complained that with the new one, because it weighs more, they've actually had to spend more on registration compared to the old one that they've replaced. However, if you do desire more power from the new Prado, can I direct your attention to the Lexus GX550, which shares a huge amount with the Toyota. Just that, on top of a decent dollop more luxury, it also features a 3.4 litre twin-turbo petrol V6.
I've actually reviewed that car, and you'll find a link in the description below to check out that review.
If you are hungry for a J150 Prado, you're going to have 5 flavours to choose from.
And if you're thinking J250 new generation Prado is your car, well, there's 5 different choices that you can make there as well, including this one, which is the Altitude. It's a new nameplate for the lineup, but you have seen the Altitude name on the Prado as a special edition in the previous version.
Also, another fun fact on the Altitude, out of the new range, that's the only one that comes with a locking rear diff as standard, whereas the J150, they all have a locking rear diff as standard.
But let's get into pricing, because according to many of you, this could be make or break for the Prado.
The J150 currently ranges from about $40,000 to $105,000 on the Aussie used market. Obviously there are models more expensive than that, but they're hugely modified, and we're just going to ignore them for the time being.
In comparison, the J250 range starts at about $85,000, tops out at around $120,000.
But like for like, where a previous gen VX will be asking about $55,000 to $95,000, the new one will be closer to $95,000 to $110,000.
Let's take this exact Prado right here, the Altitude spec with plenty of accessories fitted. You're looking at about $115,000 on the road for this vehicle.
And you know what else you could buy for $115,000? A 2023 300 series LandCruiser VX with about 40,000 Ks on the clock. And sure, it's not brand spanking new, but for potentially the same money as the Prado, you get more power, more size, more towing ability, and a comparable amount of tech and features.
And for that kind of money, you could actually get into like a Nissan Patrol Warrior, or actually maybe even a bit less.
Yeah, for potentially $10,000 less, you're going to get more power, more size, more towing capacity, and a great amount of tech and features. And look, yes, it will use more fuel, but you're potentially saving $10,000. That is going to buy you a lot of litres. However, an area that we're expecting the new Prado to absolutely excel in, because the old one nails it as well, is when it comes to depreciation, or I should say, a lack of. Take a 2020 GXL, brand new, that thing retailed for $66,000. The average used asking price today is $69,000. That's an increase of 4.5%. Compare that to one of its rivals, the slightly schmancier Land Rover Discovery in SD6 SE trim. It retailed for around about $100,000 when brand new, $34,000 more than the Prado. These days, the average asking price is $62,000. That's a drop of 38% in value. So it seems that looks and image just aren't enough to retain used car value.
Which brings us to another point of contention with this new generation model, its appearance.
Now, I know what I'm about to say is not going to be popular with many of you, but for me, I think this thing looks absolutely awesome. I love it. Look, I get that many of you are going to think this is going to become more of a fashion accessory rather than the sort of hardcore off-roader. This thing has earned its respect through its sheer ability. This thing just looks the business. I don't care. I love the way it looks. Matty?
Me too. I think it looks fantastic. The slimline headlights. I'm not a fan of this particular car's color-coded bull bar, but I do like the body design. I like the chunky side panel finishing here. I think it just has a bit more macho to it than the existing one. Not that it's a bad looking thing. I just think that this looks, well, more to my taste. I like toys, and this one sort of comes across more as a toy.
But despite what you think of the looks of either of these, one thing that they do have in common, and it can be a potential problem, is when dickheads that have no idea what they're doing try to bolt shitty mods onto the things. No matter if you're shopping for aftermarket brake parts or suspension or infotainment systems or speakers or dash cams, car care, full drive accessories, Automotive Superstore carry over 400,000 different parts and accessories. Simply type in your rego and the site will filter down to the parts that are perfectly suited for your car. Seriously, you have to check out Automotive Superstore. We love them, so will you. Check them out via the link below. Now inside, quite a few of you asked about the seat comfort difference between the old and the new model. Now, the eagle-eyed of you will have noticed that this is a base spec GX compared to the high spec Altitude with the J250. But I have spent copious amounts of time in my best mate's J150 VX. And honestly, the seat comfort in here, it's great. Obviously, it's not supportive like a performance car or anything like that, but yeah, they're good enough. But in the old one, I do have a few ergonomic issues. I just wish the steering wheel came out a little bit further to me, but that's just me. I like a steering wheel nice and close. And a few of the things you use are like a slight kind of reach away, but not too bad. One thing that does really bug me is with the touchscreen, there's nothing to lean on for the touchscreen like there is in the new model. So when you're driving, if you're trying to select something, your hand bounces all over the place. Yes, there are buttons. I love that there are buttons for the air conditioning. That's great. But yeah, it's feeling its age in here, especially compared to the new one.
And then in the 250, well, both Adam and I agree that, well, you're not necessarily getting a whole lot more wow factor for the seats, but the more money you spend, the more you are getting in these high spec seats. You're getting things like ventilation and heating and electric lumbar adjust, which you won't get in some of the cheaper models. But overall, in terms of the general comfort, I think it's pretty good, not necessarily a massive leap over the previous version. And even in terms of general ergonomics, I'm pretty impressed with how things are laid out in this new generation model. I do like the fact that you've still got buttons and switches. Lots of new cars have switched to everything going through a screen. We'll get to the screen in a sec, but I do think that you will be able to find most things pretty easily in terms of the ergonomics in here, but the volume dial is in a weird spot. It's not up next to the screen, it's down here, and might be easy for your passenger to reach, but you might forget where it is when you're sitting in this as a new owner. But the hardware in terms of the controls for your off-road stuff, that's all pretty logical and nicely close to the driver's hands. No reaching to grab things when you're off-roading or something like that. And yes, you do get a wireless phone charger as well, which is a nice little plus to have. And generally, the ergonomics, not too bad at all. It is a different kind of drive experience though. You sit sort of a little bit lower compared to the dash, obviously compared to where you sit, but you do have a bit of a different look out of this car compared to the last one.
Now next up, you wanted to know about the difference in interior quality in terms of the fit, finish and materials and plastics used, that sort of stuff. In the 150, this thing is so solid. Okay, it's not going to win any awards for design in here, but even the plastics, like nothing creaks. You know how like some cheap plastics over time, they get a bit creaky? Mercedes-Benz are terrible for this. But this, it all feels so solid. The materials used, and yeah, this is a GX, but even in the VX and the Kakadoos, it just feels a little underdone. Maybe not as premium as you'd expect.
And then in the 250, well, the materials used in here, it does feel like a big step up. It does have a nicer design and the finishing is of a nicer quality in my opinion. But also when it comes to the robustness of the materials and so forth, I think you will find that it should last pretty well. But there are some things when it comes to the fit and finish that might surprise you, like when you push down on this, there's a whole lot of flex to the dashboard, which you might not be expecting. It does feel pretty solid elsewhere though. And I do like the fact that there are soft points where you might bash your legs, which is a big plus if you are off-roading.
Although back in the 150, talk about resilience. These things are renowned for this. Okay, the materials might not be super schmancy, but my God, they can take some punishment. Even in examples that have 300 or even 400,000 kilometers on them, yeah, these interiors, they just last.
And in the 250, I guess time will tell as to how everything will hold up over time. But I guess one other thing, I was a little bit surprised by how much this all flexes around. So maybe it might develop some rattles over time, but we'll have to wait and see, I guess. Stay tuned. We'll do a used review on this one as well. But in the 250, you're really going to notice that you have seen a significant upgrade from the technology perspective here. So this big touchscreen media system, it's obviously the central focal point of this cabin. And for the most part, it's a big improvement on the last model. In some ways, it's not perfect though. There are some elements of this screen which do take some learning. Some of the controls aren't where you think they might be. Like if you want to adjust the sound, your bass, your treble, your fader, you don't do that through a sound menu. You do that on the screen that shows what you're listening to. It just takes a little bit of learning. I've also had some issues with Apple CarPlay with this car. It's got wireless Apple CarPlay, and at times it sort of just keeps playing your music or your podcast in the background while it's trying to read you a text, or you're trying to send a text, or whatever it may be. So you will need to get used to this screen. It is an improvement in terms of the display, the processor speed, and the usability generally. But just remember, you do still have some controls down below, like your volume there as well. And in this particular grade, you've also got this big digital instrument cluster. I know there are people out there who prefer analog gauges as opposed to digital instrumentation, but the reality is that this screen gives you more information, more data that you might actually need if you're going to use this car for what it's designed to do. But even if you aren't off-roading, you'll be able to get a bit more info there than you would on a screen in one of the existing J150s. And another huge update that's part of that screen is the quality of the cameras in this car. It is a vast improvement over the existing model. We'll show you some of that when we get to the driving stuff though.
Now when it comes to the infotainment system in the 150, no surprise here from Toyota, but this thing feels a generation or two old, even in post-2020 models. Plenty of owners have complained about connection issues with Apple CarPlay and Bluetooth. The rear view camera, I'm pretty sure that's actually a potato. These things, like not every owner is going to have an issue with this, but it does feel old to the point that plenty of owners ditch the standard infotainment system and just upgrade it with a better item. And obviously to find out what you should fit, check out Automotive Superstore. Now in terms of what stuff you're going to get in the J150, I'm talking features, equipment, safety tech, all that sort of stuff. Even these GXs are pretty well equipped, let alone the Kakadu. That thing has, short of the kitchen sink, pretty much everything you'd ever want. But there's so much stuff to go through, we simply don't have time to cover it in this video. If you do need to know all the specifics, go to ReDriven.com and check out the free Prado cheat sheet. It will list out everything you need to know. But as far as actually using the features and equipment and technology, as I mentioned, infotainment system, pretty much so. Great that there's buttons for the air conditioning here, but overall, it's just simple, all just works.
Now in terms of the practicalities up front, you've got the storage stuff that you would expect. There's a big pair of cup holders here with the little fingers that can hold your pretentious little piccolo coffee or whatever it may be. This particular grade also comes with a cool box in here. Annoyingly, it won't fit a 6-pack of beers, but it will fit a 4-pack. Again, pretentious. You've got bottle holders in the doors as well. And as you would expect, there is a glove box, but it's rather taken up by books and so forth. And there's the wireless phone charger in this particular grade. And one other thing I just want to call out is that the dark headliner in this new generation Prado, I am not a fan. You might be. It might help you hide the dust when you're off-roading or whatever, but I think it makes it feel a lot more claustrophobic in here.
And then when it comes to practicality in the old one, you've got great size storage bin just there for your phone. You've got 2 cup holders here with a removable divider, so it's easy to clean. Spot for your keys here. You've got a little tray here underneath that, a massive storage bin there. Good size glove box there. Excellent size door bins and sunglasses holder with a little curved lens so you can keep an eye on the kids in the back. However, one thing that these are a bit guilty of, bloody gloss black plastic, that's going to scratch in no time. And also this silver paint, over time, I'm talking like 400,000 Ks, that can start losing some of its texture. Besides that, super resilient. Then in the back seat, I'm exactly 16 centimeters taller than the co-star of the Devil Wears Prado, Stanley Tucci. This is in my driving position, and yeah, it's okay, I guess. There's a good amount of footroom, my knees aren't rubbing against the backs of the seats. The seats themselves are quite comfortable, and it's quite airy and spacious back here. But fun fact, according to the owners that own these and the Toyota Fortuner, the Fortuner actually has more space in the back.
And in the back of the 250, well, I'm about 6 centimeters shorter than the host of ReDriven, Adam Morris, and yes, I can tell you that the space in here, well, it's not as big as you might expect it to be. And that's partly due to the fact that, well, you do have quite a knees up position. There's a lot of hardware underneath the body of the vehicle, obviously, but yeah, you can see this seat is set for about my driving height, and I've got enough knee room and okay foot room, but as one of you pointed out to us, well, there's a bit of an issue with the middle seat foot room here because there's this big plastic section here that really limits it in terms of how much foot space there is if you do have someone riding in the middle here. And in terms of headspace as well, this one has the sunroof, so there is a bit of a divot here at the back, but it does feel, again, a little bit claustrophobic. And another thing, there are cars that cost half this much money that have more backseat space and are still SUVs. So if you're looking for something else, maybe check out my channel. Now this one is one of the high-spec versions of the J250, so you do have things like climate control in the back, overhead vents, you've got grab handles up here as well, and there are pockets on the seat backs too for loose item storage. Bottle holders in the doors, and here you do have a flip-down armrest with a pair of cup holders too. Pretty well accounted for, and obviously you can get the J250 with 3 rows of seats if you want it, but this particular grade doesn't have it.
And then in the old one, and remember this is a base spec GX, you still get air vents, you get a power outlet there, 2 map pockets, a pull down armrest with a couple of cup holders and door bins that you can actually get to even if you have legs. But obviously the higher up the model range you go, the more stuff you get in the back. Check out the cheat sheet, it's all listed out. Also on the topic of these 7-seat variants, obviously we would have loved nothing more than to secure 2 7-seat Prados to feature for you, but that just simply wasn't possible.
Yeah, so suck it up. We've got 5-seaters and that's how it is. In the boot of this J250, well, that's where the real controversy is, whether it's a 5-seater or a 7-seater. That's because of the design of the back end of this vehicle. It's got mild hybrid technology. It doesn't have the spare on the tailgate anymore. It's got a smaller fuel tank as a result of all of that. You've got the spare underneath, and you've still got a small looking and feeling boot. Because of this platform section that they've put in here, basically it's not as usable as it could be, and it's even worse in the 7-seater where you get this sort of cargo coffin at the back and the seats in front of it. Just not as practical as it could be.
Mate, I honestly think it's a complete shit show. It's one of the worst solutions to a problem I've ever seen. In the 150 with 5-seat form, you've got a great amount of cargo space and loading stuff in is really easy. Yeah, the 7-seater, it also has a bit of a lip here, but nothing on this. Actually, this is one of the areas that the 150 is just renowned for. It's its ability just to load it with a fridge and drawers and God knows what else. In fact, the Prado we featured a couple of years ago, it was loaded to the hilt with stuff.
And as a consideration for some owners, that has been the thing that broke the camel's back. They've decided to cancel their orders of a new Prado because of the lack of configurability so far for this rear end.
And another reason that some customers are cancelling orders for the 250 harks back to the fuel tank size that we mentioned before, 110 litres versus 150 litres. And according to Toyota, that's not going to change anytime soon because fitting a larger fuel tank will require a huge amount of re-engineering. Not going to happen.
We do have an innovative aftermarket though, so there might be solutions out there in the months and years to come that might offer you a bigger fuel tank, relocation of that spare wheel, and maybe even a deletion of this compromised rear deck area. But we'll have to wait and see, and it might cost you thousands of dollars extra.
Now, quite a few of you requested us to do a comprehensive towing test with both of these vehicles, but I'm sorry, logistically, that just cannot happen. But the towing capacity of this has increased 500 kilos over this one, but as we always say on ReDriven, towing something that's heavier than the tow vehicle itself is just asking for trouble.
And you really, really need to pay attention to the calculations when it comes to your payload capacity, how many people, how much stuff you can have fitted to the vehicle, and also gross combination mass and your gross vehicle mass. Make sure you do the maths in terms of those numbers because you don't want to make a mistake. It's very easy to make a mistake when towing.
Totally. Plus, when we spoke to a bunch of towing experts when researching these two vehicles, the overall consensus from them was that if you're going to load these things up with a bunch of accessories and people in a massive caravan, just buy a 300 series LandCruiser or Y62 Patrol instead.
And look, you could spend tens of thousands of dollars prepping your Prado to be better at towing, but it would just make more sense to spend that money on a better vehicle with a better platform that's designed for the job.
Okay, your old windscreen wipers have started to squeak and squeal and they're performing terribly. Well, I guess it's time to replace them. Well, you tell me, which way's easier? jumping on wipertech.com.au, selecting the year, make and model of your car, hitting order on the exact right blades for your car, and then relaxing. Or try to find where your nearest parts store is, head into the store and have zero idea where the wipers are located, decipher how to fit them and hope to God they're the right ones, or you could always just remortgage your house and let your mechanic fit OEM replacements. Well, I know which way I'd be doing it. Hit the link to get some for yourself. And then when it comes to what they both like to drive, let's start with the negatives with the 150 first. Now, one of the big complaints here, although it's kind of complaints and compliments, some owners love this engine, others not so much. The complaints are that it just doesn't have enough power, but then the compliment comes that these do have a great reputation for reliability. Now, we will let our resident mechanic Jim discuss reliability and mechanical issues with both of them more in a sec. But yeah, it would be nice if it had a bit more poke, and it's not the most refined power plant either.
Now, you can get more power by going for an aftermarket upgrade of some sort, a tune or whatever, but who knows what that'll do for your reliability factor.
Exactly. And then there are the complaints regarding the cruise control. In fact, some owners claim that Toyota shouldn't be allowed to call it cruise control because when it's set and you're going over, say, some undulations in the countryside, on the downward slope, it doesn't actually hold the cruise control speed. Plus, that then sets off the speed alert. So it's basically like there's two technologies fighting against each other.
And yeah, I've experienced that, and it's annoying.
Now, you can turn off the speed alert, but it is a convoluted process to do. It would just be nice if the cruise control worked properly in the first place. But look, aside from that, we really struggled to find any other complaints about the driving experience of this thing. Okay, the steering is a bit vague and it does have that kind of old school jiggly body on frame platform characteristic, but understandably because it is an old body on frame platform.
And look, I think that it does still have a robust feel to it.
Absolutely.
The other big plus is not as many of those really annoying interventional safety systems that you get in new cars. This doesn't have them, and that means it's less annoying to live with in some situations.
Also, I don't want to make out like this thing isn't refined. It is plenty refined enough to be your daily driver. And when you get up into the higher specs like the Kakadu, I'm not going to go as far as saying it's a luxury vehicle, but it's pretty bloody good. Actually, loads of owners recommended if you do want a completely sorted suspension, find one of the higher models with the KDSS system fitted. That thing's awesome. However, as good as this thing is to drive, when you've got higher spec, more recent models kicking off from about $60,000, for that kind of money, you could also buy a Y62 Patrol. And I tell you what, that thing beats this for driving experience, hands down.
Okay, so in the 250, we do have a different drive experience, but it's not a dramatically better experience, no. I don't think. New platform, obviously, same as the 300 series, but it does have a little bit more weight to contend with, so it's a bit chunkier feeling.
Yeah, I think I'm a little underwhelmed personally. I think I was expecting it to be like, oh wow, this is a step on. And it does feel obviously like a newer car, but I'm definitely not blown away.
Yeah.
I'll go as far as saying a little disappointed.
Little disappointed, okay. Well, I think that probably a lot of that comes down to this powertrain. As you said, carryover powertrain compared to the previous version, but with the mild hybrid technology. So it's designed to make it less rumbly and less dislikable when you're in certain situations, because the starter alternator generator thing will try and make it smoother to take off from a standstill. In traffic, it is pretty good. It does make for a slightly more refined experience, and part of that also comes down to the 8-speed automatic transmission. It does rely on the gearbox a little bit more in my mind. It doesn't necessarily just sort of go into first gear when you come up to an intersection. It'll sort of use second gear or third even. So I think the logic of the powertrain is better, but as we said earlier, it's heavier, so it's not necessarily quicker or anything like that. It doesn't feel powerful.
No.
And you know, I have done a drive review of that GX from Lexus, and it's like a completely different vehicle.
Wow.
It's like, you know, if you do want a powerful Prado, go buy a Lexus GX, because you'll be, well, anything but disappointed in my mind.
Does it have, because even in this one, I think, I don't know, maybe I was hoping for a bit of that inherent jiggle to be gone, and it is less than in the 150, but in the Lexus GX, Is the ride even more compliant?
It seemed to me that it was. Like, this has got the off-road package, so it's the altitude, so it's got those all-terrain tyres and off-road wheels, so it does have an inherently different character. Like what you would get on one of the other models that was modified, then this is sort of what you might get in terms of the ride comfort.
Yeah.
It's not uncomfortable, but I don't think it's super squishy. It does still feel like a robust 4x4, not like a luxury car. The Lexus does feel a bit more like a luxury car in my mind.
Also on the off-roading stuff, I know a lot of you requested us to do some serious off-roading. Again, we borrowed these cars, so we simply can't do that. Also, there are thousands of videos of 150s getting hammered off-road, so you can see what they can achieve. And there are specialist four-wheel drive channels pushing the 250 through its paces, like 4x4 24/7's recent video, great video, go check it out. If you want to know what they're like off-road, watch them.
Yeah, because we're not doing that.
I'm not breaking someone else's car.
But there's one big thing about the tech in this car that makes it far better than the previous one, and that is the camera technology here. It is so good.
It's amazing.
Like the surround view camera system, you can get it with a see-through camera, and it does make a big difference to the drive experience. And really, if you are, I guess, nervous about scratching your new Prado, at least you'll have some peace of mind when you can play with that camera system and make it, well, basically visible to you from the outside, from the inside. If that makes sense.
It's also instantly intuitive. Like, I honestly didn't know this car had that camera system, and within 3 seconds of using it, I'm like, oh, this just makes sense. It's fantastic.
But again, 2.8 litre diesel engine, that 300 series with the more assertive engine, stacks up pretty well in comparison.
Let alone a Y62 with a V8.
Now mechanically, what can go wrong with these? Well, the good news here is I'm a mechanic and I can tell you. Now we're going to kick off with the 150 series here. Now mechanically speaking, these things are actually pretty dialed in. In fact, in this category, this engine is probably one of the most reliable ones. Now the post-2020 models, they had a lot of improvement. They had revised cylinder head, they had revised engine blocks, they had revised pistons and rings, they had improved exhaust manifolds and an improved EGR setup. DPF complications are way less common, and in fact the DPF has a 10-year warranty on those later models too. So mechanically speaking, overall, by the end, they had it pretty much worked out. The later 150s also had a remap of the 6-speed transmission, which addressed a lot of the issues from the earlier versions. And how that compares to the 8-speed transmission in the 250 series, well, we don't know yet, and time will tell. And now onto the 250 series. Fun fact, these are the first Toyotas in Australia to have an AdBlue system, which is a level of complexity added as well. And speaking of complexity, let's talk about the hybrid system. While the mild hybrid system is considered to be reliable so far, there are some concerns about its long-term off-road reliability. Unlike all of the other Toyota hybrid systems, this isn't really particularly well integrated. For example, you can't move the car at all under its own electricity. That just doesn't happen with these. And as far as the claimed added power goes, look, if it's adding any power, I don't think anyone is really noticing it. And the fuel economy claims, well, look, they probably could have got more fuel economy gains by saving some weight on the vehicle or maybe even some aerodynamic changes. So you've got to wonder, why is it even there? Well, marketing is one reason why it's there, and meeting government rules and regulations is another reason. For whatever reason, it is there. Now, I'm not saying it's a bad system, but that system with the AdBlue as well, it's just adding a whole extra level of complexity to the car. And extra complexity means there is just more to go wrong. And for a vehicle that's built its reputation on being able to cross a desert, and you might choose it for that, you might not choose it for that anymore. But having said that, for what they're probably going to be used for is going to the shops and dropping the kids off at school, well, they're absolutely perfect for that. However, if you do want to cross the desert in a 250 series, I would wait a bit, because someone somewhere, I reckon, is working on a hybrid system delete, and it could be worth its weight in gold.
The question so many of you wanted us to answer is, which one should you buy? As anticipated as the new Prado has been, and while it will most likely fulfill most buyers' criteria and will probably be a sales success for Toyota, it has missed the mark for many of the hardcore faithful.
The J150 has earned its following because it's basically the Swiss Army knife of SUVs. It's hugely capable, excellent reliability, has one of arguably the largest support and aftermarket networks out there, and even the older Prado is retaining its value like very few other cars this side of a Suzuki Jimny. The replacement model, look, it does tick all the image boxes, it's clearly superior in dozens of ways, but even if the stupid boot space issue and concerns surrounding the hybrid setup don't concern you, maybe it's still too early to commit to buying one?
But you got to remember, it did take Toyota 14 years to get the J150 to that point, and it's pretty bloody good at that point. This is the first iteration of the J250, so there's lots of room for improvement, and it's already better than the first generation one of those ever was.
100%. But look, overall, would I buy a new Prado? I love the look of it. I totally get what's going on here. It's a potentially awesome thing. I wouldn't buy one. For way less money, I'd stick with a mint condition, high spec J150. Actually, I wouldn't do that either. I'd actually buy a Y62 Patrol.
Yeah, I can totally understand. And an MX-5 with the change left over, right?
And a holiday.
Yeah,
and
all those things.
Bunch of groceries.
And hey, if you are looking for new car review content, I've done a review of another version of the Prado and plenty of other 4x4s as well. So please check out my channel and subscribe if you can. I would appreciate it. Thanks for having me along, Ads. This has been fun.
Mate, despite it being 42 degrees, I have also had fun. Thank you so much, mate.